Close your eyes for a second. I want you to picture an ancient god. You probably have a very specific image in your head. You see Zeus holding a lightning bolt. You see Jupiter on a marble throne. Or for the sake of today's deep dive, you see Marduk, the golden patron god of Babylon. We imagine these figures as eternal, cosmic CEOs. We picture them sitting on clouds since the Big Bang, directing human history like chess masters. We are conditioned to believe that religion drives history. We're told that the gods pick the kings and the gods define the nations. But what if I told you that is completely backward? Today, we're going to tear down the facade of the Babylonian king of the gods, because here's the uncomfortable reality that theologians don't want you to think about. Gods don't create nations. Nations create gods. I've been digging into the work of Dr. Joshua Bowen, specifically his insights on Mesopotamian history, and the evidence he presents is damning. The character of Marduk wasn't born a king. He didn't start at the top of the pantheon. For centuries, he was a nobody. He was a low-level, minor deity pushing paper in the divine basement, completely irrelevant to the major powers of the time. So how did he become the supreme ruler of the universe? Simple. He got a political promotion. This isn't divine revelation, it is a corporate takeover. Marduk is essentially a middle manager who became CEO solely because his dad, in this case the city-state of Babylon, hostilely acquired the rest of the market. I'm Farid, and today we're looking at the hard evidence. We're going to deconstruct the Enuma Elish, analyze the military campaigns of Hammurabi, and by the end of this episode, I'm going to show you why Marduk, and arguably every deity like him, is nothing more than a political mascot. Let's look at the map. To understand the hoax, we have to look at the before picture. We need to look at the crime scene before the evidence was tampered with. If you go back to the early 2nd millennium BCE and look at a map of Mesopotamia, you are going to notice something shocking. Babylon isn't the capital of the world. In fact, compared to the heavy hitters of the time, Babylon is essentially a truck stop. Look at the layout. The power vacuum is being filled by the dynasties of Essene and Larsa. You have Rimsene of Larsa dominating the south, you have the powerful city-state of Mari up in the north, you have the kingdom of Elam over the Zagros Mountains in the east posing a constant threat. These were the superpowers. And Babylon? It was just one of several independent city-states, trying not to get crushed by its neighbors. Now, here's the critical part where the theology meets the reality. In the ancient world, a god's power was directly tied to their city's power. It wasn't about who was holier, it was about whose army was winning. Because Babylon was a geopolitical nobody, their patron deity, Marduk, was a theological nobody. We have this idea that Marduk was always the head honcho, but the historical record tells a completely different story. During this early period, Marduk was nowhere near the top. He was a minor league mascot. He wasn't Enlil, the god of wind and storms who actually ran the show. He wasn't Anu, the sky god. Marduk was just a guy you prayed to if you lived in Babylon. If you lived in Larsa or Ur, you didn't care about him. Think about the implications of that. If Marduk was truly the eternal, supreme creator of the universe, why was he pushing paper in the divine basement for centuries? The answer is simple. He wasn't the supreme god yet because his city hadn't bought him the promotion yet. He was sitting on the bench, waiting for a coach named Hammurabi to put him in the game. Babylon doesn't stay a truck stop forever. Enter King Hammurabi. Now, you probably know the name from the Code of Hammurabi, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But in the context of political history, Hammurabi isn't just a lawmaker, he is a ruthless, expansionist conqueror. He isn't content with being a minor player in a crowded room. He wants the whole building. Dr. Joshua Bowen breaks down this military campaign, and it reads like an action movie script. Hammurabi starts checking names off his hit list like he's John Wick in a chariot. First, he pushes the kingdom of Elam out of Mesopotamia. Then he turns his eyes to his rivals. He conquers Rimsene of Larsa, the big dog of the south. Then he pivots and takes out the ruler of Ashnuna. Finally, he marches north and crushes the city-state of Mari. In a relatively short period, Hammurabi systematically deletes the competition. Suddenly, Babylon isn't just a dot on the map, it is the map. But, and here's where the theology hits the fan, this creates a massive public relations crisis. Think about it rationally. You are now the king of kings. You rule from the Persian Gulf to the northern plains. But your patron god, Marduk, he's still a local nobody. He's still a second-tier deity in the eyes of the people you just conquered. You can't rule a supreme empire with a beta male god. The people believed that if a city won a war, it was because their god was stronger. But the old myths, the stories everyone grew up with, still had Enlil and Anu running the show. The mythology was out of date. The political reality was writing checks that the current theology couldn't cash. So, Hammurabi and his successors had a choice. Admit that military might is just human violence, or rewrite the nature of the cosmos. Spoiler alert, they chose the rewrite. Enter the Enuma Elish. You probably heard this described as the Babylonian creation myth. When we hear creation myth, we think of something written at the dawn of time. But that assumption is dead wrong. Look at the timeline. Hammurabi establishes his empire around 1750 BCE, but scholars like W.G. Lambert date the Enuma Elish to the late 2nd millennium, likely around 1200 BCE. That is a massive difference. This text wasn't written before Babylon became powerful, it was written because Babylon became powerful. It's a retcon, retroactive continuity. It's the same thing comic book writers do when they want to change a superhero's origin story to fit a new plotline. The Babylonians essentially looked at the pantheon, saw that the god Enlil was currently the boss, and said, we need a legal precedent to fire him and hire Marduk. So they wrote a drama where the older gods are threatened by the chaos monster Tiamat. They are too scared to fight. Marduk steps up and says, I'll save you, but only if you sign a contract making me the supreme boss forever. They agree, he wins, and voila, Marduk is king. It isn't a holy revelation, it is a political press release justifying a change in management. Now, you might be asking, Farid, how do you actually sell that to the public? People aren't stupid. They've been worshipping Enlil for 1,000 years. If you try to ban the old gods, you get a riot. So the Babylonian theologians came up with a much smarter solution. They didn't ban the competition, they absorbed it. They used a process called syncretism. Dr. Bowen explains this using the single greatest analogy in the history of biblical scholarship. To understand ancient theology, you don't need to look at the stars. You need to look at the Wu-Tang Clan. Stay with me. Think about the RZA, the leader of the Wu-Tang Clan. He goes by the RZA, but he's also known as Prince Rakim. He's also the Abbot. He's also Bobby Digital. Now, if you're a fan, you know these aren't 4 different people. They are different personas, different titles for the same individual. Babylonian priests applied the Wu-Tang method to their gods. They started teaching that the rival gods weren't separate entities, they were just titles for Marduk. They would say, oh, you worship Enlil? That's great. But did you know that Enlil is just the name Marduk uses when he's ruling over the wind? And Ea? That's just Marduk's name when he's doing wisdom stuff. It is a stroke of political genius. It's the ultimate corporate merger. They didn't defeat the other gods, they ate them. They stole their name tags. This brings us to the most fascinating psychological trick in the history of religion, the anthropomorphic mirror. Dr. Bowen points us to the work of Thorkild Jacobson. He explains that originally these gods weren't people. Enlil wasn't a king, he was the wind. Enki was fresh water. They were forces of nature. But as human society becomes more complex, our gods become more complex. We don't make gods in our image, we make gods in the image of our government. Jacobson points out that as Mesopotamia developed bureaucracy, they actually invented a god who was the canal inspector. Why? Because they had human canal inspectors. So when Babylon transitions from a small town to a massive empire, the storm cloud can't just be a storm cloud anymore. A storm cloud doesn't understand tax codes. So they put a robe on the storm cloud, they give him a crown, they give him a legislative agenda. Look at the stele of Hammurabi. You see the king receiving the laws from the god. But if you look closely, the god looks a hell of a lot like the king. Marduk is just Hammurabi with superpowers and better PR. The god didn't mold the clay of humanity. The politics of humanity molded the clay of the god. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Okay, that's ancient Babylon. They were pagans. But surely the biblical traditions are different. Surely prophecy is a divine lock, right? Wrong. The exact same mechanism of rewriting reality is found all over the Hebrew Bible. We see it in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel predicts King Nebuchadnezzar will destroy the city of Tyre. It's a "thus saith the Lord" moment. But reality had other plans. Nebuchadnezzar sieges Tyre for a decade and fails. The prophecy was wrong. In a rational world, the prophet admits the mistake. But in religious text construction, you never admit a mistake. You just release a software patch. Later, in Ezekiel 29, the text essentially says, okay, since you didn't get Tyre, God is going to give you Egypt as a consolation prize. It is a hermeneutical sleight of hand. When the prophecy fails, they don't delete it, they move the goalposts. So what is the takeaway? Why spend 20 minutes dissecting the career path of a Mesopotamian storm god? Because Marduk is the smoking gun. The history of religion is not the history of gods revealing themselves to men. It is the history of men inventing gods to justify their own ambition. We saw Marduk rise from a truck stop deity to the king of the universe only after a human army did the heavy lifting. We saw the priests use the Wu-Tang method to absorb the competition. We saw that the Enuma Elish is just retroactive propaganda. If you can edit a god like a Wikipedia page, then that god was never an objective reality to begin with. So, the next time someone tries to sell you on the divine authority of a scripture, remember Marduk. Remember that he was a political puppet, dancing on the strings of the Babylonian state. Stop looking for the divine in the clouds. Start looking for the human fingerprints on the clay. I'm Farid. If you want to support this rational quest and get early access to our deep dives, consider joining our YouTube membership community. Until next time, keep delving, keep questioning, and stay curious.